Here I'm going to show you how to get the last result from a list in Excel. So how to get the last good order, or how to get the last bad order, or the last order from a particular individual. I'm going to show you how to make the formula and then how to customize it with your own criteria so that you can get the last result for whatever you need from your list. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to TeachExcel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. So how I'm going to show you this is by using a sample master worksheet. So this is where you might want to summarize the data within the workbook. Now over here is our raw data. So it's a very simplified sales list basically with order, name, total, and whatever other information. Now it's made very simple, but what could happen is you could auto import more data into this, so it would fill down, and you might want to get some results from it. Now let's go back to the master worksheet. Okay, so the formula that we're going to be using here is confusing and complex to pretty much everyone who doesn't already know it. So how I'm going to go about this tutorial is to first show you how to make this function work for you, then how to change the criteria for it, and then after that, after you know how to change it to work with your data, I'm going to explain exactly how it works, because as you can see, it looks a little bit confusing. I mean, 1 divided by this table and so on, it's a bit confusing, so I'll cover how every little piece of it works at the end of the tutorial in case you want to learn that. All right, so let's start first. We want to get the last good order. And I'm going to pull in all this information here, and it kind of looks like a VLOOKUP setup, but it's definitely not. So the function that we're going to use here is the lookup function. And before I continue, nothing in this tutorial is going to be an array formula. Nothing at all. So in this function, this formula, there's only 2 things you need to change. Right here and right here. For this example, getting the last good order, this is where we include our logic for that. So in between the red parentheses is where you have what should evaluate to true or false. That's very important. Now this right here, this is a range on the data tab. So that's what data means right there. And it can only be either a single column or a single row. So since I want to check for the last good order, I'm going over here to the data tab and I say, well, if I have an order, it should have an order number. So I'm going to use that to figure out how to get the last order. So that's why I'm using column A. So this is going to be the column that you use in your logical function to figure out whatever you want. In this case, to figure out which is the last cell with data in it. Now, to make it a logical function, to make it evaluate to true or false, which is what's needed, we have to do a little check right here. So we've got the column, but what do we want to do with the column? Well, with the column, I want to see if it does not equal nothing. Now, it's kind of a confusing concept, but here we have 2 quotation marks that have nothing in between them, and here we have the logical operator does not equal. So this is checking if the cells in this range, in this column, do not equal nothing, which is the same as saying, is there something in the cell, yes or no? This is very important. This is the backbone of this formula. Now over here, this is where you want to get your data from. So this formula is going to return the last result. So it'll get the last cell that has data in it. But once it finds, let's say that row, where do you want to get the data from? Do we want to get it from column A? Do we want to get it from column B or C or wherever? This is the part that lets you decide that. Now, even when I repeat it out loud, it seems kind of confusing. So let's go ahead, delete this formula and build it from scratch here, step by step. All right, so equals lookup, tab, lookup value. It's always going to be 2, comma, then it will always be 1 divided by, then we put our parentheses, and it is within these parentheses that we make our conditional statement. So first we choose the column that we want to use in our conditional statement, then we make the conditional statement. So I want to find the last cell that has data in it in my list, which is going to be the last good order in this case. So I go over to my Data tab, and you can, in this case, select the entire column. However, if you have a lot of these formulas or a slow computer, it can really slow down calculation because of how this function works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to select the top of the list all the way down to something that is going to be greater than it will ever get to. So obviously it'd probably get beyond row 12. Maybe I could make it row 500. But I'm just going to make it larger than the list could ever get to, but not the entire column. So if your computer runs fine with making it the entire column, go for that. Now that I've selected the data, I have to make my conditional statement. So you can see the formula filling in up here in the formula bar. What do I want to do with these cells? What do I want to check for? Well, I want to check that the cell has text in it. I don't want to return a blank cell. I want to get one that has something in it. So I make my conditional statement. So here I say does not equal nothing. Basically, it's a double negative. Hit a comma, and then let's move back over to the master worksheet where you can see it building in up here. So here we've got data A1 to A12 does not equal nothing. Now don't worry that it filled in master there. Let's go back for the last argument. Where do we want to get our data from? Well, we want to, in this case, return the order number. So I'm going to go ahead and select from this column. Now this has to be the exact same size as the previous selection. So it doesn't have to be the same column, but it still has to be 1 to 12. So it still has to include 12 rows in it. Then hit close parentheses, enter, and now we have it. So I selected the range that we want to use to figure out which result to return. I did a little bit of logic right here, and then I said which data to return. Return data from the same column. When you've got a master worksheet like this and you want to bring in a bunch of data like this, you want to make it so that your data can copy over really quickly. I don't want to have to make these references over and over again. It just increases the chances that you're going to have an error. Take note, order number, name, total, other info. Exact same order as this worksheet. Here, I want to get data from the next column over. So A1 to A12 for the name should be B1 to B12. And for the total, C1 to C12, and so on. However, this data here should not change at all. So let's go ahead and select it, hit F4 to put dollar signs in front of it. That means it's not going to change when we copy this formula around on the worksheet. However, this one will update. So let's go ahead and delete these guys. And I'm going to click the quick fill handle and drag it to the right. And we can see that it has updated perfectly. So this is still the same here. But we have B1 to B12, C1 to C12, and D1 to D12. Now let's move on to the next example. Everything is going to stay the same, except what we have in between the red parentheses. So notice that the data still stayed the same, the data and the column reference right here. So data worksheet column A, because we still want to check for the order number, but this time I want to return the last error. So here we have an error for Megatron's sale. And in this case, I'm going to say that my POS system, point of sale system, is just going to output the error into the order column. You need to figure out where that would work for your own data. But I want to return the error. So it's still from the same column, but how do I make this evaluate to true or false based on the error? Well, I use another function called the isError function. So here I'm not using a greater than or less than sign. I'm using another function in Excel. And the isError function allows me to evaluate if a range has an error or not, and it's going to output true or false, which is exactly what we need for what happens in between the red parentheses here. Now, once you have that evaluating true or false, just figure out where you want to get your data from, just like in the last example. So here we want to get it from column A. And like the last example, you want to keep this as a relative cell reference, so no dollar signs. And here have the dollar signs so that when we copy it to the right, everything will update accordingly and we won't have to make the formula 4 times. So you can see automatically updating. So when you make this work for your workbook where you want to get the last result based on some criteria, this is where you input your criteria. You input a range reference, single column or single row, and then you perform an operation on the range to make it evaluate to true or false. So you put it inside of a function like this that has a result that is true or false, or you compare it to something using comparison operators, greater than, less than, equal, not equal to, and that's going to return a true or false result. So let's go over here and I want to show you how that works. I'm going to do the first function really quickly because a lot of people get confused with evaluating to true or false. So let's see this one, not equal to nothing. Let's copy this down and let's go down here. So this is the function we entered into the first one. Does not equal nothing. True, 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 error, true, true, false, false. Now let's do the second example. Is error. And we have one true. So if you're a little bit confused about this formula, just make your conditional formulas first. Make sure they evaluate to true or false. Figure that out. Get it working how you want. It's going to return the last true value in the list. So going bottom to top, it will return the last true value. Here's the one for Megatron. Bottom to top, last true value, Captain Ron. Once you have that working, you can take this basic setup and just turn it into the range. Now entering the range here isn't going to do too much, but you can say, okay, I want this, which I now know works, to apply for A2 to A10, does not equal nothing. Now I know how it's going to look, and I can go ahead and copy paste that into my formula over here. So let's say, for instance, that I wanted to, let's go over here, let's delete this, let's add another sale, okay? 00129, let's go for Thanos. Let's say he purchased $1,000 of whatever to help make his Infinity Gauntlet. Okie dokie. Now if I want to get the last sale for Thanos, let's go ahead and do this using the framework that I just gave you. So first, how do I figure out which one is Thanos? Well, we want to make a conditional statement. So does this equal Thanos? The equal sign, a comparison operator, means it will always evaluate to true or false. False and two trues. Remember, this is going to select the last true value, which means we will get this result. So let's go ahead and do that right now. I'll just make some more data here. Last Thanos order equals lookup 2, comma 1 divided by open parentheses, the red parentheses. This is where we put our conditional statement. So let's go over here, data tab. Now, where do we want to check? Well, we want to check in the name column. So I will select the name column, select a bunch of rows below it so that our data will never fill in more than that. I'm going to hit F4 now to put the dollar signs in there because we don't want this range reference to change when we copy the formula. Now that we've selected the data, let's input our check. So we'll output a true or false. I want to check if it equals Thanos. Close the parentheses, comma. Now we select what data we want to output. Remember, it has to be the exact same size as what we just entered, so 12 rows, but it doesn't have to be the same column. I want to get the order number. So A1 to A12. Close parentheses, no dollar signs on this one. Control Enter. And last Thanos order. Now let's try copying it over. 1, 2, 3. Bam! Perfect. So you can see it's actually not that difficult to enter, to input this, once you get this part down. This is really the only difficult part. Just has to evaluate to true and false. Now this may seem like it didn't work because it's the same as this last good order up here. So let's just go ahead and test that out. We'll pop in one more real quick. 130 Bob bought $50 in a. So last order was Bob. Last Thanos order, 129. All right, now I know that was a lot, and I tried to cover it in the best possible way to show you how to make these formulas work for you. And hopefully now you have an understanding of how to do that. You don't have to change very much. And you don't have to watch anymore. But what I'm going to do now is to explain how this actually works. So let's use the last Thanos order as the example. It only has really 3 parts. Well, there's 2 ways to do it. Up here, you can do the vector one and you can do the array one. But really only this one, the method that I've used, is the one that is actually good to use. So just the top one here. Now, for the 3 arguments, we have this one right here, which is the lookup value. This is what it's actually going to search for. Then you have this, the second argument. Here it's called the lookup vector. This just means this is where the lookup function will search for the lookup value. And as you may notice, this argument kind of acts like an array formula. So we can do wonderful things with it, with functions and with logical comparisons, to have a bunch of cells, or to have all the cells in a particular range evaluate to true or false. So this is a great argument for that, and that's why the lookup function is so powerful. So this is where all the values are going to be that it searches for to find this value right here. Now once it finds this value, it's either going to return the value that it found from this specific list, which is not what we want here, or if you input the third argument, the result vector, it's going to output a result from the corresponding row. So if it finds the correct result in row 5 for here, for this range reference, but we tell it to output the result from this range reference, well, it'll output it from row 5 in column A. So this is the data that you want to return, and that's why it always has to be the exact same size as this range here. Doesn't have to be right next to it, or to the left, or to the right of it, or any of that. Just has to be the same size. Now, that seems simple enough, right? But how do we get these values, which are order numbers, or in this case, the name, Thanos, how do we get that to equate to the number 2? Okay, so how the lookup function works is like this. It's going to search this list for 2. And if it cannot find 2, it's going to find the next highest value in the list. And it searches for the 2 going from right to left or bottom to top. So that's how we're able to get the last result, is because it searches for that right to left, bottom to top. Now, that's all good. But Thanos right here, okay, great. We want to get it to equal 1 or 0 or 2. To figure that out, you have to realize how true and false values work. So remember I told you this comparison here has to evaluate to true or false. That's very important. And true and false are very special in Microsoft Excel. They're not just the words true and false. They have an actual value associated with them. So if I go out of here, let's go over here or down here, nice and easy. let's say that I type true and I type false. What do you think is going to happen if I multiply these values by 1? This equals 1, and this equals 0. So true is the same as 1, false is the same as 0. So in this function, what this is doing is it's creating a bunch of true and false values, which can be used mathematically as their 1 and 0 equivalents. And what happens if you divide 1 by 1? You get 1. What happens if you divide 1 by 0? You get an error. So you can see it right here, equals 1 divided by that, 1, copy down, the divide by 0 error. So when the function is searching for 2, it's going to see a bunch of divide by 0 errors, and then it's going to finally see a 1. And the very first one that it sees, going right to left or bottom to top, the very first one it sees, that's the result that it's going to return. And just to show you quickly, if I did leave off this third argument, it would just return a 1. So I know that was a lot of stuff to cover, maybe some things that you didn't expect to learn here. But now you've got a full explanation of how this formula works, every single part of it. And I know it's not that easy to understand, especially the first time that you hear it. So what I want to do right now, let's select this formula. Let's go to the Formulas tab and go to Evaluate Formula. This allows you to step through the formula to see how it works, and you should see exactly what I just told you. So here, the first thing it's going to evaluate is the range B1 to B12 to see what equals Thanos. We should get 2 true values and 10 false values once I hit evaluate. And there we do. There's our first true and there's our second true. Remember, trues evaluate to 1, falses evaluate to 0. So we should get, the next time I hit evaluate, we should get all of these to be where only 2 ones appear and 10 errors. So evaluate one more time. And then we have the error values with, where are the ones? There's 1, 1, there's the other one. So now the lookup is going to use the 2, the lookup value, and it's going to search right to left to find either 2 or the next highest value. It's going to end on this one right here. And it returns the corresponding result from the last argument, which is 00129. So I find the evaluate formula feature can really help you figure out how to use the more complicated formulas. So I do advise going through that if you want to make sure you really can visualize how this works. But just remember, the only thing you really need to change is right in between the red parentheses here. You have to make this evaluate to true or false. And this argument right here, it has to be the same size as this range here, 1 column or 1 row. And it's where you're going to return the data from. And if you're confused about evaluating to true or false, go over to your raw data, make a separate column over here, and try out some formulas to see if they evaluate to true or false and what results they're going to return. I know this was a long tutorial, but I hope that you found it helpful. And that's how you can get the last result from a list in Excel based on whatever criteria you have. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.